Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this wonderfully cold afternoon to do CDBG work, which is the best winter time of the year to kind of start these applications, figure out how 2022 is going to shape out for your communities and projects, and hopefully get some information on the use of community development block grant funds. You'll have several DHCD members presenting today. A lot of them have expertise with certain projects and definitely have some great knowledge for when you start developing project and when you can think through problems or opportunities with communities and with project ideas. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Chase Sawyer to kind of lead us through.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. As he said, Chase Sawyer here at DHCD, working in the Outreach Planning Compliance Office. I just want to start giving a general overview of the program. For most of you all who've applied for this program before, probably not new information, but for those of you who haven't, we'll get started. If we want to go ahead to the next slide.
Pretty sure Doug's computer was running a little slow. You can maybe share some information you're going to, and the slide will advance shortly.
Yeah, no, well, we'll let it catch up. There we go. Perfect timing. So CDBG program is funding authorized through the Housing Community Development Act of 1974. It's administered on the federal level by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. So they're the ones that we have to make sure our program is compliant with, and at the end of the day, the ones that we have to make sure are happy with how we run the program. There are three national objectives that all projects must meet one of these three. So a low and moderate income benefit, low and moderate income individuals, benefit to them, elimination of slum and blight, or must address an urgent need within the community. Next slide. And while I wait for that one to advance, so our program serves non-entitled localities. That's essentially localities here in Virginia that do not receive their own funding through HUD. Not many of them, but there are a few. And they are localities. So the actual applicant for a project has to be the actual locality. Although a lot of localities do work with consultants or PDCs, at the end of the day, the locality has to be the one that signs off on submitting the application. We do have a program design that should be put up here in the upcoming days. Establishes our overall program goals and objectives. We try to tie everything back to that. We also run the program on a sort of request for proposal structure, and that you all, the localities, are submitting the proposals, and we will approve and move forward the ones that we think are best, that best fit the overall goals and objectives. We will also be having fact sheets to help with these application processes going out shortly as well. And those will all be found, both program design and fact sheets will all be found on the DHCD website. So we go to the next slide. It just kind of breaks down some of the funding for this upcoming program year. Not much has changed, pretty consistent. So competitive, we've just shy of $10 million, planning grant $700,000, open submission funds $6 million, and urgent need $1 million. Again, funding, not much has changed from the prior year. So we'll go ahead, next slide. So when it comes to the schedule, it's essentially two dates, or really just the one date to remember is April 1st. Open submission, planning grants, and urgent need. All those applications will become, we'll start accepting on April 1st, and they'll run through December 30th of next year. The other date, the first part of the year, would be the competitive grants. Those are all due by April 1st. And we hope to have that application also available up online in CAMS here shortly. But again, April 1st is kind of that pivotal date to keep in mind. Should we have a second round of competitive, we will address that later in the year. But for now, these are the only dates to really focus on. So next slide, we'll talk about the program changes. Again, haven't changed a whole lot. Some things I want to kind of highlight for y'all. Public services, we've added for open submission. So the 3 priority areas we're looking at are lead hazard reduction, child care programs, and health services. Another thing we've added to open submission, scattered site for housing rehab projects, and we're allowing applications for up to $1 million for that. We've also slight change, whereas last year we had our EDE fund for open submission, our economic development and entrepreneurship applications. We're kind of going back to what we had been doing in previous years, where we had local innovation and community economic development. So we're splitting our EDE programs into those 2 again. We've also extended the base contract period for planning grants. And then when it comes to housing rehab programs, both in the planning grant stage and the actual construction project phase, we are bolstering our energy efficiency activities. And with that, I will turn it over to Rachel Jordan, who will talk about some of our open submission program changes.
Hello, everyone. Rachel Jordan here, policy analyst at in the Community Development Division at DHCD. So for some of you guys that just joined, you haven't missed too much. We just kind of gave an overview of the CDBG program. People are still joining. Welcome, everyone. Just a recap, this is being recorded, which will be available on the website. But just giving an overview of our program. No major changes in funding, but we've made a few programmatic changes, which is what we're covering now. The previous slide was about public services, that we have switched from a competitive application to now open submission, which open submission programs will be open April 1st in CAMS. Another open submission program that we've added is housing rehabilitation, specifically scattered site. The scattered site program activities and everything that is eligible under scattered site has not changed from previous years. The LMI benefit has to be 100%. The applicant determines the specific project area and its boundaries. And we're going to really rely on your definition of the boundary, whether it's physical boundaries, if there's some kind of geographic clear boundary that separates a community, or if it's some other characteristic like demographics or in relation to a community center or some, we're leaving that up to you. But the applicant just make sure that you are providing maps and a definition of that project area in your application, which we'll go into more detail later. Our next program change is that local innovation is coming back now as its own standalone open submission program. Local innovation projects are meant to support economic development, workforce development, job creation, entrepreneurship assistance. Virginia individual development accounts are eligible under local innovation projects, as well as multi-purpose community centers. That was a previous priority that we have kept under local innovation. So that's just continued. And then also small scale manufacturing under local innovation. Community economic development is again now going to be its own open submission program, supporting job creation, site redevelopment, and site readiness. Infrastructure is eligible under site readiness, potentially site redevelopment also, but when it's supporting the development of a specific physical site. One thing to keep in mind is that for all community economic development projects, DHCD will require a letter of credit, a bond, or other form of security to hold against that property or facility. No repayment required if the locality has a long-term lease, and DHCD will only require repayment of a property if it is sold. And that's if the locality owns it. If it's privately owned, the locality can loan it to the business owner, and a formal agreement would need to be in place for that. Next slide. So our open submission grant cycle, as I mentioned, it opens April 1st, runs through December 31st as long as funding remains available. We have $700,000 reserved for planning grants. This is the same as previous years. And then we have about $7 million left to fund other open submission programs, which here are public services, construction, ready water and sewer, local innovation, community economic development, urgent need, and regional water and wastewater. If you remember from last year, we had combined local innovation and community economic development fund into the economic development and entrepreneurship program. We think that the activities under each are separate enough and can stand up alone on themselves, that both of these programs deserve their own separate funding pools. So, and then on the competitive side, which again are due April 1st, the CAMS application will be open hopefully by Wednesday, if not by the end of this week. The competitive grants include housing rehabilitation, comprehensive community development, which involves housing and at least one other activity for infrastructure, such as water, sewer, street improvements. Public infrastructure as its own, which is water, wastewater, drainage, stormwater, streets, and then community service facility, and then business district revitalization. And we'll go into each of these programs on their own in a little bit. So next up, we're doing a little deep dive into housing, which I believe Joanne Pierman is giving us some information on.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Since this is a how to apply workshop, I'm going to give you some tips on having a successful housing rehab application. And the first is to know your project area. Know it well, know what each house will receive in assistance or not. Make it manageable for a 24-month timeline. Don't say you can do 15 houses in 24 months if your area does not have the capacity to do that. If you don't have lots of contractors who can bid on these houses and get them done in a timely manner. Second bullet is leverage. Some of the leverage sources directly from our agency can potentially include the weatherization program, partnering with them, seeing what they have to offer, and certainly our lead hazard reduction funds, of which we have quite a bit. And we're really trying to get these monies out the door and to help make homes safer for children and expectant mothers and just everybody who's affected by lead. So please consider both of these as valid sources, and we've got contact people for you to pair up with to see if they can be helpful in your housing rehab project. What are some of the other leverage sources that you all can think of? Let's type some things in the chat here. Who else has partnered with other agencies or other, nonprofits to get your housing work done? Okay, Sir Cap. Thanks, John. Anybody else partnered with another agency to help with your housing needs? The Home Consortium. Thanks, Janet. People Inc. Thanks, Charlie. Stacy says LEAP. Okay, thank you. Also, Rural Development might be a good source. Fahi, Kenny Rogers. Thanks, Kenny. And Brandy, Sir Cap again. Yes, these are all good sources. So hope you took a few notes on that. Use your contacts. John Bateman says that RD is an excellent source, and we found that to be a good partnership as well. So do include leverage in your application. You get scoring points for leverage, and who can't use some points. Leverage can be more than just dollars. It can be time and talent. There are agencies that will, donate services to you. So just consider all types of leverage. You want to get those points on your application. So again, the lead hazard reduction program does include incentives for participation, including the admin and construction. So can't stress enough how important it is to try to make that work. Now, certainly there are some areas of concern where it relates to lead hazard reduction. There must be a child in the home less than 6 years old, or a pregnant mother, or it could be older adults there who keep children on a regular basis. And so again, Susan Hill is our program manager for the lead hazard reduction, and she'll make it very seamless for you to find out information on how to pair your lead with a CDBG housing project. So the existing cost limits for pre-1978 houses are still in force when there are no abatement contractors involved. But if your rehabs will eliminate lead hazards through assessments and stabilization and abatement and clearance, the grantees may use our new cost limits, which at the bottom of this slide are the biggest news hot off the press, that our new cost limits for post 1978 rehabs, meaning houses built after 1978, will be, drum roll please. I don't see anybody else doing this but me. Okay, $125,000 per house rehabilitated for post 78 construction. And if there is a substantially reconstructed home, the new cost limit is $150,000.
Woohoo!
All right, thank you. Now listen, this might sound good, but, and it is good news, but it also was instituted because of the times we're living in with supply chain disruptions and the like. We've heard from our partners in the field, and we know that some of the challenges that you're going through. And we're trying to help as much as we can, but we also, as said earlier in this slide, want you to get leverage. We can't expect CDBG to pay it all. Okay, so let's work with these new cost limits, and let's see if that advances everybody's mission. Next slide, please. So some common mistakes that are made on housing rehab applications. The first is that many of the communities have not clearly documented how many homes actually need assistance. For example, you've got an area with a total of 50 homes and 24 of them will be assisted. Okay, that's good because you've gotten your participation agreements, and so you know how many people you will help. But we also want to know about those other 26 homes that you are not addressing. We can't just assume that they're all non-LMI or they're all vacant or they all have something else going on with them. So you have to tell the story of all the houses in your project area, not only the ones that you're assisting, but the ones that you're not assisting. Because there's an area on our scoring sheet that asks about, are you serving all the need? And if there are other needs that are unmet, then we need to know about that, okay? So you have to tell the story of every house in your 4 or 5 or 8 block project area. Another common mistake is unsigned participation agreements by the identified property owner. Please make sure that all of your agreements are signed. This can be difficult in a COVID world, but that's what the U.S. mail is for. You know, we need to know that there's buy-in. You can't say that you're doing 24 houses if you don't have 24 signed participation agreements. Okay. Another common mistake is outdated participation agreements. As you all know, sometimes your application is not funded in year 1, and so you come back in year 2. Recognize that you have to update that information. You just can't roll it over to the second application phase. Our participation surveys and agreements and backup documents can be no more than 6 to 12 months old. So make sure that your information is current. Okay, next slide. Housing summary table. Please just take a look at this. I'm not going to dwell on it, but a lot of times these numbers are not matching up. You may have one figure in one column and it just does not correspond to the other columns. So pay particular attention to the column headings and which ones should add up and which ones should match. We scrutinize these applications very seriously. And as the first bullet says, 1 landlord participation agreement and 2 owner-occupied participation agreements were not signed by the property owner. We actually make those kinds of notes. And they could be a reason for denial or a reason for us asking for additional information or a reason for during the contract negotiation period, if you are successful, us telling you to go back and get various agreements signed because you have not demonstrated the actual buy-in from the community. Housing rehab is labor intensive and it requires a lot of detailed documentation. Another note that we've made in the past is 7 participation agreements are dated between 2016 and 2017. Again, you know, outdated information. So make sure that your information is up to date and current. Next slide, please. So comprehensive community development has an emphasis on housing, but it must target at least 2 activities. Other significant activities must be supported by the neighborhood surveys, the preliminary engineering report, or other needs assessments. An example of an activity being supported by a neighborhood survey could be that it's too dark on my street, and that's why there's a lot of criminal activity, and we need street lights, or, you know, something like that. Don't take those surveys lightly. Those are the people that live in that project area 24/7. So they know more about the project area than you do. You might just ride through during the daylight hours, and you don't know how dark it is there at night. So if they give you that kind of comment, you take note. Another comment might be that they need some recreation or facilities for the kids. The kids play in the street all the time, and we could use a little park in our community. Don't take that lightly. Do a comprehensive community development project and not just housing. Give them a little tot lot or a basketball court or something like that. Okay. Again, preliminary engineering reports must be provided to justify infrastructure improvements. And we read those. We take a look at those and see what the recommendations are of the engineer. So significant activities include water, sewer, streets, broadband, economic development, community service facilities. It could be a myriad of things. So that's where you can draw your second or third activity from if you're working primarily on housing, but you want to do something more holistic, something more comprehensive. So the limits on a CCD application request are $1,250,000 for 2 activities and $1,500,000 for 3 activities. And this is another news flash that you may not have picked up on if you're familiar with our projects. Usually the admin is 10% of that amount, but now we are allowing the admin to be added on top of those amounts. Okay, so if it's not 10%, we have provided a figure for you. So 10% of 1.25 million would be $125,000. But in this case, it will be only 110. And I hope I didn't lose you in that explanation. But these are the admin amounts for the 2 and 3 activity projects. So for a 2 activity project, it would be the 1.25 plus $110,000 for a total of 1.36, which is better than the 1.25 that you used to get. Is everybody understanding that? Show of hands. Okay.
Yep, understand.
Okay, so that's a bonus, right? That's a goodie. And lastly, and you'll hear more about this on the next slide. This was a blooper on my part to talk about water and sewer limits. But the limits, if you add water or sewer to your housing project, is capped at $20,000 per household for water and $25,000 per household for sewer. And you'll hear more about that on the very next slide.
And here it is. Thanks for setting me up for that, Joanne.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Kathy Boatwright from the Abingdon Field Office, and I'm briefly going to talk about public infrastructure. And public infrastructure projects include water, sewer, stormwater drainage, street improvements, and it also covers housing production. And we typically fund the public infrastructure for a housing production project. As Joanne mentioned, the max CDBG investment per water connection is $20,000. This is consistent from last year, and the same is true for the sewer connection. It's $25,000, and the max award that you can receive for this is $1 million. Your project area for a public infrastructure project must be at least 51% LMI, and service must be made available to all occupied LMI households. So as you all know, when you are doing a public infrastructure project, some people might decide to back out of the project after they initially say that they are going to participate. And so that's what we mean by must be made available to. It means those households have the option of participating in this project. And one way to determine the needs for your public infrastructure project is through surveys, and survey as many people in your project area as possible for that. And when you are preparing your application, we don't need to see copies of the actual surveys, but we do need to see a summary table of the survey results and a copy of the survey instrument that you use, so we can see what type of questions you asked and how that information is quantified and used for qualitative data in your application narrative. And once you know your project area and the need has been determined, you will need to collect user agreements showing that you have households that are interested in participating in the program. And if a household is not interested in participating, you also need to include declination statements from those households. And we prefer that you have at least 80% signed user agreements for water projects and 75% signed user agreements for sewer projects at the time of application. And as Joanne mentioned, the window for those documents is typically 12 months. So make sure that those are up to date, or you'll have to go back out and just check back in with those households to make sure that those participation agreements are still valid. And see, one other note to touch on is if there is a water project, oh, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that this is out there before we change it up, because this helps set up your project at the very beginning if you are awarded in terms of the expectation for tracking benefit. If you have a water project, there will need to be water meters set up for each of the households that benefit from the CDBG investment. And that's all from me.
Hey everybody, my name is Kelly and I'm a CDS in the Abington office, and the community service facility type of project is a $1 million grant, and we can go up to $1.5 million if it is a multi-purpose community facility. The biggest thing that we need to capture with a community service facility project is there must be a clear demonstrated need that the community needs this community service facility, and that at least 51% of all users will be low and moderate income. And you can achieve that by surveys, and you would want to do that pre-application. It could also be an LMA, which is a low moderate area, and you can find out if your proposed community service facility is in a low moderate income area by using census data. Examples of these kind of projects are daycare facilities, skill building facilities for youth and underemployed people, adult daycare facilities, health clinics, and a project that I currently have is the Calfee School Adaptive Reuse Project in Pulaski. And this was a historic African-American school, which has been turned into a daycare facility to aid in job retention for LMI benefit, an economic development center, business incubator, community kitchen, community space, African-American history museum, and a few other multi-purpose rooms. And we were able to braid both CDBG funding and ARC funding with this project. So there are a lot of neat things you can do underneath this title.
Hey, Kelly, I don't know if you can see it, but you've got several raised hands about that slide.
Oh, let's see. Oh, can a CSF program be used for a public library? I don't believe that it can. Yeah, so Matt just answered that. Usually the locality would be paying for the library, but you might want to talk to Matt, but I don't believe a public library is something that we would fund with a community service facility. Does anyone else have any questions with this? If you want to put them in the chat. EB, even if the library is a nonprofit entity, I don't think that we are set up in our program design to fund libraries. Now that might be something to put in the queue to let Matt and Rachel and policy know about, but as of right now, I don't think we fund any libraries. Was it a Rosenwald school? I don't know about that. No, Joanna's shaking her head no, so I don't believe it was. Chastity Bryant and Rick Cobert, did you have any other questions?
No, I was, that was prior when Joanna requested raised hands.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. I'll go ahead and pass it on to, I believe Andrea is next.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. I am Andrea Gaisley. I also work out of the Abingdon Field office with those lovely ladies. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of different other project types. The first one being economic development or community economic development, CED. Rachel touched on these a little bit before. We are offering projects up to $1 million. This fund is designed to support economic development activities, particularly those creating employment, and to low to moderate income persons. So you can get up to $1 million. Now you can get $1.2 million. This is available for non-industrial projects that have a regional impact. There is more detail on those in our program design. As Rachel said, irrevocable letter of credit, bonds, or other guaranteed form of security is required for in the amount of the grant. And typical categories for a CED project typically fall into the job creation or retention must be 51% low to moderate income. So you must have those self-certified income verification forms. Another type is site redevelopment. This targets sites that have been rendered unusable. And then the last one is develop readiness. This is completion of improvements which result in the creation of business and job opportunities. You will see those types of projects as business parks, things like that, where we're getting the site ready for a potential business to come in and create those jobs. Next one. Yes. The next one I'm going to cover is business district revitalization. I guess since our guru Doug Ellis has left, that is now me. That has been passed down to me. You can get up to $1 million for these projects for a BDR if the applicant chooses to undertake a loan pool or housing revitalization efforts based upon their strategy, identified strategy, after construction activities have started. You are eligible to apply for those through the assistance of the open submission program. So they may not have been necessarily part of the initial application or the initial project, but are available with the open submission program. But that is only after completion of 70% of the construction activities. The at least 25% blighted physical or a 50% vacancy rate economic, which is required for business district revitalization. And we also require you to submit an economic restructuring plan or economic development strategy. This is how you implement those economic strategies, and this is how we determine that you have a plan, how your business or district revitalization is going to be successful. The applicant must provide analysis of housing and other community needs. That means that you have determined that this business district revitalization is your highest priority, that you have met housing and other economic or other community needs such as water, and that the BDR is your highest of priorities. And your design and marketing activities are eligible for up to 5% of the cost. Applicant must enact and enforce project area ordinances. You must adopt minimum design and maintenance standards. This is very, very important. We don't see this a lot, and it might not be part of your project application, but it does need to be a part of your project implementation, because this is how your project will sustain after DHCD is gone and we're done and all the project activities are complete. This is how you can sustain this for years to come and have your downtown looking fabulous. One important change to note is that there's no more facade match requirement. Now, this is good news, very good news. However, we have to keep in mind for budget purposes that just because there is not any more facade match does not mean that the amount available for CDBG has changed. It is still a $1 million cap. So we have to keep this in mind when we are doing our PARs and our cost estimates of how many facades are participating and how and what their needs are, because different buildings have different needs. Some people might just need a coat of paint. Some people might need a total rehab with, you know, brick repointing and new awnings and new windows and things like that. So everybody's got different needs. So you have to keep that in mind in cost estimates. It's no longer, okay, this is how much they can match, so this is how much we can give them in CDBG. This is now up to the town and the business owners to distribute the funds how they see fit for the facade owners and business owners. Any questions about the facade match change? No, we're good. I don't see any little digital hands, so I will move on.
But there is something in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Frank wants to know what the impetus is behind dropping the facade match.
That is a question for Matt Weaver.
Yeah, I think what we saw through the pandemic, and I have seen generally in a lot of our small rural communities, is the inability to provide that match. So instead of stalling out or completely killing a business district revitalization project because of the match, we were waiving it in instances, but now we're just getting rid of it. But I think, as Andrea pointed out, if you have facade match or you have even property owners that are putting money into the interior and then CDBG funding is going to the exterior, you know, that's leverage. That makes your project much more competitive. That's going to have a much stronger impact on the revitalization of that business district or commercial corridor. So just because it's not required doesn't mean it wouldn't be advantageous for the overall project.
Thank you, Matt. All right, moving on to my last slide, which is the common mistakes that we see. The number one is that we don't see the demonstration of blight. It's not clearly defined or depicted. Again, 25% or more physical blight or 50% economic blight. It needs to be a good detailed map with a complete listing of identified blighting properties. Now, if you have any questions about this or of what a good map looks like, I know myself and Kathy Boatwright. Evie, can you do? Yeah, thank you. Myself and Kathy Boatwright have very good examples of what a good project, a blighted map looks like. It needs to be clearly defined of what the property is. It needs to say what level of blight it is, and then everything needs to be numbered. The next one is not addressing other blight or vacancies in the project area. So just because this person isn't participating, because just because facade match has gone away does not mean that we still don't need participation agreements from facade and business owners. And we see a lot of the times that they may not necessarily be agreeing to participate in the project, that there is, what's the other way that you're going to address that blight or vacancy of that property? Are you going to, you know, heavily suggest that this owner does something? Is it going to become a condemned property? Do you have the ordinance is in place to condemn that property? Things like that. And also keep in mind for your project area, the bigger it is, the more properties you're going to have to address that may not necessarily be participating in the project. So really think about your project area for these. The next one is not submitting an economic restructuring plan or economic development strategy. A lot of times those are just left out of the project application, and that can be very heavy. That can be a lot of points on your application scoring sheet taken away. And the last one is not submitting documentation of support of the business community for the project. A lot of times we don't even see any business owners or community members on the project management team or in the project management plan, and we don't see a lot of letters supporting the business district revitalization project. And that is a very, very important part of this. You need to have that business community support for the project, because those are the people that are going to carry on this project after it's finished to make sure your downtown is looking good. There's businesses thriving. There's the communities coming in to shop at those businesses, to eat at that restaurant, to go to that coffee shop. So that documentation is extremely important. And that's it for me.
Thank you, everybody. There's been a lot of application specific information that I think would be beneficial to everyone here. So thanks, everybody. So we're going to go into a little bit more about the competitive application process and how we score them. In general buckets, the competitive applications are scored on that you're meeting a national objective. You get another score based on your fiscal stress, which is something we calculate here at DHCD. You guys don't have to worry about that. Your regional priorities, which, speaking of, those will be sent out soon to PDCs. And so that basically is just telling us what your community's priorities are. Costs and commitments, and then going into specific project specific evaluation, including community priority, and that's based on what you submit, demonstrating that your project meets an identified community need, that you have all the stakeholders involved from beginning to the end of your project. Readiness, which includes timeliness, as well as costs committed. Capacity, that's like on the locality level, as well as citizen participation. And then the long-term impact of the project. So here are just some tips and tricks as you're developing your applications that you should keep in mind that will be helpful in getting a higher score on your applications.
Rachel, you've got a question in the chat room.
Yeah. The question, are these evaluations weighted per bullet or specific to presentation details? So each, and this is just for competitive, each project type, those are scored separately, like by project type. But each of these bullets is something that's evaluated in every application, if that answers that question.
Yeah, and Robert, there may not be, what's on the slide is not indicative of just what we score on. We can provide those score sheets to you so you can see kind of what an evaluation is for your application. The big things, as noted before, readiness to proceed, where you've captured, the survey income and project details accurately, and then the leverage, is it committed? So that's kind of your three big topics, but we can provide the specifics.
Great. So one of the things that is required for competitive applications is that 2 public hearings are held. We do look for the documentation of the public hearings. That includes the minutes, the agenda, who was present from the local government, involved in the project. Hey, EB, could you mute real quick? So yeah, the first public hearing is more of the general information on the proposed project and how the locality has used CDBG funds in the past. The second public hearing, that's when it's more specific project details and asking basically the locality is saying, yes, we're going to pursue this. And a resolution comes from that, and we do check for those assigned resolution. The timing for public hearings, this is something that trips people up a bit. The public hearings, they have to be advertised at least 7 days prior. They have to be advertised in a local paper and then one other method. And you do submit screenshots of your receipt to the local paper, as well as like a photo of where the advertisement was posted, whether it was in a newspaper, a community board. Yeah. And then specifically for if we hold a round 2 competitive application process in the fall, for resubmittals or resubmissions of a prior application, one public hearing would need to be held. And those details are going to be in our 2022 program design. So just check for that. But you would need to hold one more public hearing. And that's just for resubmittals. Another thing that we check for is in our program design, we limit each local government to $2.5 million in open CDBG projects. If you have one that is at the end, the projects have to be closed out by March 30th in order to not count against that cap. And as I mentioned, for the public hearing documentation, we look for the certifications, assurances, copies of advertisements, and copies of all notices, including the transmittal letter to the PDZ confirming the pursuing of the project. And then regional priorities will be due in March, but we will check for them prior to April 1st when the competitive applications are due. So these are just some of the most common mistakes that we see in application submissions. As far as costs and commitment, the documentation of leveraged funds is what we look for. If it's a local match or local funds, including in-kind funds, these have to be documented in a resolution. If they're coming from some other entity like the Tobacco Commission or SIRCAP or anything like that, there has to be a signed letter of funding commitment committing these funds. It's not sufficient to address them in your narrative section if they are indeed committed and you don't provide documentation. We do look for that documentation. For project-specific project type requirements, we do look for participation agreements. The signed user agreements is really what we rely on, and those numbers have to match all the numbers submitted either in your narrative or in your like your housing needs assessment. If you've sent user surveys, who has completed them, all those numbers have to match and be demonstrated in the documentation. As far as readiness and like timeliness, what I mentioned earlier, we do look for easements, that all the easements needed have been acquired. Your environmental review record, that process takes a long time, so start that as soon as possible. And then any other obstacles that might prevent beginning of construction should be noted and explained, because we do look for that. As far as project needs and outcomes, a common mistake or error area is that maps are not clear. I think most people think like, oh, it's a map. It shows where it is. Should be self-explanatory. No, we do rely on your maps to show your project area. We are leaving the definition of your project area and boundaries up to you. But the map has to clearly show not only where it is physically, but what's going to be in it. So like if it's a housing rehab project, we want to see what houses are in the project area, which ones have been surveyed. Basically showing the community that you want to address and the needs that are going to be addressed. And so similarly to committed funds, we look for your project to align with community development plans and studies, and that depends on what you submit. So just like taking a section of the comprehensive plan that your project aligns with, upload that into the attachments tab in your CAMS application, and that would suffice. But again, just mentioning it in your narrative, but not submitting a copy of that plan is not sufficient. So this is a picture of a poor map. It's not clear which houses are going to be in your project area. The different colors, they correspond with the legend, but there's no explanation of the legend, or like explanation of what the specific colors correspond with. And it also could be, we just don't know why some houses were left out of the project area, if there's a need for them. This is also another kind of confusing map. The colors don't really seem to correspond with the legend. It's not clear why. Obviously, there are different phases to this project, but it's just not clear which houses are being addressed in the current phase that is that you're proposing to fund for that round. So next we're going to go into a good mapping example. So this area is clear. There's no like major outliers that are questionable. The numbers correspond with a physical inventory that's attached. And that inventory would indicate like the specific housing home address, and then whether they're LMI or non-LMI, and if they have a user agreement in place or not. So a physical inventory just lists the specific property addresses that you're going to include in your project. there can be like a little description, nothing like super long, but showing where it is, which street it's on, if they're going to participate or not, and then it's some kind of methodology to describe its state. So if it's LMI is what we're looking for, if it's LMI or non-LMI, and then if it needs rehab or not. Okay, so cost and commitment. As I mentioned earlier, the documentation is really what we rely on. Here, it looks like on the left, it looks like a good amount of funding is going towards this project from a variety of sources, but no documentation was submitted as part of the application. So unfortunately, they got zero. We accepted $0 out of all of that funding that was set aside for it. And then this is just a screenshot for that same application, a screenshot of our score sheet and how we score all leveraged funds. So we score based on all non-CDBG money that's been committed for this project, and then also local money put up by the local government towards this project. And then for competitive, these applications, funding specifically, each application is scored against all others to get an array score. And so unfortunately, because they had 0% for both, they scored in the lowest category for costs and commitment. So yeah, as I mentioned, the application deadline for competitive applications is April 1st. Everything has to be submitted into CAMS. Again, the application should be available in CAMS by Wednesday. Yeah, once you're in there, go on the attachment tab, and everything that has a specific label is a required attachment. The narrative section will also say, answer this question, but provide this attachment in the attachments tab. So just some helpful information for CAMS. If you don't have a profile now, go ahead and create one. It's fairly simple. If you need any help with that, please reach out to me or Matt. But we also have a CAMS user guide that's available on our website that walks you through every process of creating a profile, as well as a DAA account, which is what you'll need to submit in order to be able to submit remittances once your project is approved. Another important thing to note for a CAMS profile, make sure that your staff roles are up to date. Even if you have an existing profile, make sure that they're up to date. If you have a consultant working with you, make sure that they have the permission to edit applications. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of the top of our dhcd.virginia.gov website. Sorry, it could be a little bit more clear, but at the top of the web page, right next to the search bar at the top, on the left side of that, there's a link that says Access CAMS. It's in blue, and you'll just click that, and that will take you to the CAMS website.
Yeah, so we threw a lot at you. Some of you have already asked questions. We're sure there might be plenty more as you prepare your applications. We always hope that the first time we're hearing about a project isn't when we're reviewing the application. So with that in mind, we've set aside some time in February to provide some technical assistance, answer any questions, and address some specifics you might have for the project. So we've got February 15th, February 22nd, February 24th, some blocks of time set aside. But obviously, if those times don't work for you all, feel free to reach out whenever. The next slide should have the contact information. So just send us an email and we can try to get you scheduled during one of those time slots.
And if you have thoughts, please do take advantage of those TA sessions. It's a great time just to sit down with staff, both your current project community development specialist or Rachel, Chase, and myself, just to think through issues or ideas and go through some of those maybe common mistakes. But before everyone starts mass exiting, I'm going to put in a couple dates in the chat box just to make sure everyone's aware. Affordable and special needs housing applications are due March 31st. The Industrial Revitalization Fund program got some infusion of ARPA funds, but they're doing some planning and feasibility studies. Those are due February 11th. So if you're doing a downtown project or even just looking at a former industrial or commercial building, take advantage of those IRF funds to help plan or implement your project. And then lastly, the Appalachian Regional Commission deadline is February 2nd for the area development applications. So if you have any questions on those, feel free to reach out. We'll get you to the appropriate DHCD staff. But as you heard, kind of a quick recap, the 2022 program is not hugely different from 2021. We have approximately level funding, $10 million for competitive and about $7 million for open submission. With those open submissions, they'll be available April 1st application. The planning grants will go pretty quick, and with $7 million and looking at larger application awards, the open submissions on a first come, first served basis. So just throw that out there for what it's worth. The competitive pot is usually very competitive, and we look forward to a lot of applications come April 1st. So competitive applications are due April 1st. Open submission applications begin April 1st. So if you have any other questions, this presentation is recorded. It'll be on the DHCD website under the CDBG resource page, along with the program design and some of the application guidance materials. And I put in the chat, we hope to have the application questions available in CAMS on Wednesday. That's what we are aiming to do, is have that Wednesday afternoon so everyone can begin the amazing process of filling out your narrative budget and all the attachments that go along with your CDBG application. So Amanda Healy, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Matt. So I'm going to put on my Captain Obvious hat. And so wanting to make sure that all of our participants are aware that if an application was submitted or interest was expressed, and for one reason or another, whether we were out of money or there was additional work that needed to be done, if we have an existing application from you that is not funded and you want to be funded in the 2022, you'll need to resubmit an application. Is that correct?
That is correct. If you have, there's a couple that have open submission applications submitted that are still in the works. Open submissions submitted in 2021 do not have to be resubmitted. But yes, a competitive project that was not awarded funds would have to be resubmitted.
Thank you.
And one day, this is no promise, but it's a hope of mine, applications for resubmission will be a lot easier. You may not have to do the entire thing over again, but don't start holding your breath on me now. Any other questions or project ideas you want to throw out? Anything lingering for anyone?
I would like to point out something, please. We are ecstatic with these new housing rehab cost limits, but please be aware that it does have a bearing on the size of your project area and your budget. For $1 million, you can only do 8 rehabs if all of them are at the $125,000 cap. And so this means a smaller project area. It means you can get in and get out and do it within 24 months and apply immediately the following fall or spring. But it does have an impact on other things. So yes, we're happy with the increased cost limits, but it will have an impact on your project area, and it may involve more phasing of your projects.
And this is Amanda, and I'd like to follow up to that and say that one of the things that we've heard a lot of over recent years is that contractors, the number of contractors that exist in a particular project area is diminishing for any number of reasons. If you have any concerns about the number of contractors that you might have interested in participating in a project, that's something that you need to be looking at as well. It might be a great thing to tackle as part of a planning grant. The number of contractors, regular contractors, and maybe specialty areas, maybe lead related. All of those people are going to be needed as part of a housing rehab project. And it's time to start looking at that well ahead of submitting an application.
This is Kenny Rogers from CIRCAP. I applaud and appreciate the increase in the limits, because I think what it's going to allow us to do is to go back to some of the other contractors that previously would not work with us because the limits were so low, to maybe get additional contractors to our contractors pool. So thank you guys for doing that.
One of the reasons why we did that, Kenny, is that trying to squeeze everything out of people for years and years has taken a toll on us. So we are looking forward to an expanded contractor base, in part because of this, and in part because of the great work that you guys do on a routine basis.
Well, thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you all joining us this afternoon. If you do have any questions or want to discuss your projects, please do not hesitate to reach out. But we appreciate all you're doing for the communities and look forward to partnering with you here in 2022. Have a great afternoon. See y'all.